Hi, everyone. This is Charles Hoskinson, broadcasting live from warm, sunny Colorado. Always warm, always sunny, sometimes Colorado. Today is December 12th, 2020, 12/12/2020. Special day for somebody somewhere in the world. And I decided I'd go ahead and do an AMA. Why not? It's fun, huh? Yeah, I like AMAs. A little cold outside, so I decided to put on my poncho. Yes, I do have a good, bad, and ugly poncho. I think it's an essential component of everybody's wardrobe, and I hope you guys agree. So anyway, it's been a very long month, a very exhausting month. A lot of stuff has happened. Tons of releases. We've pushed out Daedalus 3.0. First time ever on Daedalus mainnet, not just flight. We have hardware support for both Ledger and Trezor, and I was playing around with it the other day, sending out some transactions. New IOHK staking policy is underway. A lot of people ask, what do we do to secure our ADA? And actually, the cold environment that we use, we're probably going to open source that. So look for that in the coming weeks. Sam and I built it together. We've been going back and forth about what to do there, and it might be really cool to open source all those scripts and a live CD using NixOS. So I think you guys will really enjoy it. Catalyst Fund 2 is now open for voting. That's a long time coming. It's taken, I think, 3 months to get there. So much pain has gone through that. Everything you can imagine that we've had to overcome from a team perspective has been done. And I'm real proud of that team. They really got it over the line. There's still a lot of little bugs and issues, but the beautiful thing is that once we get through Fund 2, Fund 3 will be a lot better. We'll have a nice voting center in Daedalus, and we'll have all this cool stuff. And I very firmly believe that month by month, that process is going to rapidly evolve and eventually get tens of thousands of people. Just found out today that the Cardano effect is retiring. This is their last episode today. It makes me really sad. We were the first funder of the Cardano effect. We brought together Sebastian, Rick, and Philippe, and Rick and Philippe kept with it. And we funded the first 76 episodes. And then the Cardano Foundation took over funding for the remaining episodes. And they had a real great run. And Philippe and Rick are wonderful community members, and they're part of the best in the Cardano ecosystem. And I can't wait to see what they do next. And I can't wait to see who rises to the occasion and creates more podcasts and content, highly specialized content about the ecosystem. And I think many people are going to do that, and in not just English, but in many languages. So overall, things are looking pretty good. Devnet's likely next week for the KEVM Devnet. They are right now in DevOps hell, just getting all the final stuff prepped and primed and ready to go. We updated the 2018 code base that we had when we did the early alpha of the DevNets when we were just testing KEVM and Yella to the 2020 Mantis code base that we released for Ethereum Classic. So we get to reuse that code. We get to reuse all the tooling and monitoring, and it was a Herculean effort to be able to do both and release both at the same time. As some of you know, December 9th, we actually launched the new Mantis to some great fanfare and acclaim. People really enjoy it in the Sagano testnet with it to show off some capabilities and features, functionality. So real happy there. Glow is looking good too, and we're real happy to be working with Mutual Knowledge Systems. Francois's team has been incredibly diligent, despite the fact that they're not very large. They've been working 24/7 to get a lot of stuff done, and a lot of people are getting very excited about Glow. So much more to report, much more development going on. We've been moving, we've been pushing, and we're just trying to get as much as we can done this side of Christmas. Then Christmas break comes in, we have a skeleton crew. We don't try to release anything after December 15th. It's super, super important to hold back a little bit there. And then come January, we pick it right up where we left off and keep pushing, keep releasing, keep updating. We should have a Trezor and Ledger firmware update sometime January. It was supposed to come in December, November. There were some issues on their end for their update windows. And so we had to wait a little bit, but there's some new features, functionality coming to Ledger and Trezor, which you should be able to use in Daedalus. So look for that as well. And we'll just keep updating Daedalus. I keep pushing for the Identity Center. I keep pushing for multi-sig. I keep pushing for paper wallets and these things and cracking the drum. There's just so many features and so much to do that we're going to get there. Hybrid wallets as well, and partial delegation as well. That's a Q1 thing, but it'll get there. You know, it's real important that we get that finished. Let's see here. D parameter keeps decrementing. We're still on target for full decentralization by March, and peer-to-peer keeps turning on. So we're still on target for that by March as well. So all things considered, we're well on our way for liftoff. Not bad, huh? All right, let's get to your questions. Pledge from Daedalus Ledger Nano X from Pete M. Yes, that is one of my goals. Ledger live staking soon. I'd love to see that. There was some commercial negotiations between the Cardano Foundation and Ledger for getting Ledger Live support. It's a little expensive, and they've been going back and forth on that. And so hopefully they'll be able to get that done. It was a lot easier with Trezor, but Ledger Live's a great interface. I really like it myself, and I was actually using it yesterday. From Marcos Santos, anything about Africa? We are going to have an Africa special. Kind of sounds like a line of pot, doesn't it? We're going to have an Africa special episode where we talk about all the cool, interesting things that we're doing there and announce some cool deals. Dude, what are you wearing? A dead deer? No, it's a poncho, sir. It's a very nice poncho. From Tom. Hi, Charles. What are Cardano's plans for multisig? Looking to better secure things. We are actively working on a multisig coordination server, and multisig is fully supported on the command line. So at the moment, you can use multisig through a command line, but the user experience isn't so good. So we are implementing a coordination server, and we are implementing an interface for Daedalus. So multisig will come to Daedalus. I'd also like to do hardware multisig as well. So we're in discussions about how to do that on a Ledger and Trezor, which I think is the highest level of assurance that you can get. What the hell is going on with Coinbase? You wrote some on Twitter, some stuff. Could you explain? Coinbase is a large company, a lot of things going on. You talk to them on the left side, and the right side does something completely different. We have a great relationship with them. We fully implemented Rosetta support. There's a lot of little things we do. Obviously, you guys know that we use them as the custodian. We're still waiting for staking support there, and we're trying to augment Rosetta to do that. And I was just perplexed on this one article. You know, it was an Ethereum killer article, and they mentioned Polkadot, but they neglected to mention Cardano. It's just strange. You know, I think it's just an issue of user education, and a lot of these journalists, for some reason, are still not familiar with Cardano, and we work very hard to try to educate them. But, you know, 2021, that's just never going to happen again. It's our year because everything's turned on, and we're going to set it all out there. And remember, they're a very large company, and so there's whenever you deal with that left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. What's the relationship between Rosetta and Coinbase? Rosetta is the framework that Coinbase uses for the tokens on its platform, both on custody and listed. It's an open source framework that they came up with, and it's a really, really good way of approaching exchange wallets for listing and for custody. How's the Ergo stablecoin thing going? Quite well, actually. I have a meeting about it, I think, before the end of the year. And Mergo and Ergo are doing interesting stuff, and Bruno Paleo is doing interesting stuff. Thoughts on standing desks? My secretary uses one, Michael, and he likes it. A lot of people I've met like it. You'll catch me dead using a standing desk. I like to sit. Thoughts on the Floyd Mayweather versus Logan Paul matchup? Mayweather's going to win, and it's a travesty of boxing. And just on that, there were years and years and years of waiting to get the Manny Pacquiao Mayweather fight, and they waited until when they're both too old for it to be an exciting fight. Yet Logan Paul's super easy to do. You know, this is what boxing has come to. It's just all exhibitions. From Nico, Charles, I messaged you regarding adaptive and algorithmic music for games. How's your game going? I'm glad you asked. So right now I'm vetting one of our first hires for my game company, and it goes by the name Martin, and I give him a bunch of stuff to do, and we'll see if we can negotiate, work something out. But he's a little older, and he's going to come in as one of the game designers and game architects. And he worked with Gary Gygax and wrote a whole game system with him. Gary Gygax is one of the creators of Dungeons and Dragons. So right now what he's doing is he's systematically going through Legends of Valor, which is the game I bought, and he's basically writing down everything that's wrong with it, all the game mechanics that need to be updated, and so forth. So what we're going to do is a two-stage process to resurrect this game. The first is that we're going to do an enhanced edition for the game. So an enhanced edition is like Baldur's Gate Enhanced Edition from Beamdog Studios. And there they just took the original game and they updated it so it would run on modern PCs. And then they added a lot of things that would be present if the game was made today, just for playability, usability. The problem is that Legends of Valor really was not made in a time where standard RPG mechanics had solidified yet. So there's no journal system, quest system, there's no persistent mapping system, there's no level system, experience system. The combat and magic system are incredibly primitive. The HUD is extremely primitive as well. And as a consequence, there's just massive things missing that even if I was just to update it so you guys could play it, it wouldn't be a fun experience because we just expect so much to be there. Now, when I was a young kid, we didn't have any of that. So, okay, it was great, you know, but nowadays we have to be realistic and reasonable. Second, I disassembled the code using something called Kahidra, which is a disassembler that the NSA uses. It's now an open source project, and we thoroughly examined the source code to try to see if we could resurrect the source code and port it. Or at the very least understand all the artifacts, the dialogue trees, the things like the bitmaps and art and these things. And almost nothing is reusable. So we know the whole plot, we know the structure of these things, but everything's just going to have to be built from scratch. So for the enhanced edition, what we're going to do is backfill in all the missing gameplay mechanics, but create a spiritual enhancement that functionally is the same game. Obviously, massively improved for playability. We're going to write that in JavaScript and use something called Babylon.js and make that a browser game and make it a cell phone game and a desktop game as a Node application. And I think we can do a lot of really good work there and build something great. And probably we're going to do it as an open source project. So basically we'll do like 6-week sprints, 8-week sprints. It's almost like an early release title. And over a period of time, 12 months or so to 16 months, once full development has started, we should be able to build that game out. Now, I'd be really excited to put some blockchain-based components as well. For example, non-fungible assets or these things and make them blockchain-based and pull them in. It's basically learning how to bring a video game to market. And I've been talking to some people, Nexus out of Michigan State University, who do game development just to kind of learn the dynamics of that business. I know software and I know mathematics and I do business stuff. I even grow mushrooms, but I'm not a game developer. So there's a whole thing there to do. So that's the enhanced edition. And hopefully we can do this as a collaborative open source project and build a great community around it and just learn how to do that. Once that's done, the next step will be to do a remastery and a complete redesign and rewrite. And I have over 100 pages of notes that I've kept throughout the years of what I want to do. So that is going to be a totally new game, and we're going to make it a AAA game, use a middleware graphics engine kind of like Unreal or something of that, so you can do a AAA game and do a cross-deployment across PlayStation, Xbox, and PC, and build it just like any other AAA game. And we'll probably do a really cool crowdfund. And we might do a DRM system using blockchain and a litany of other things to kind of merge gaming and crypto together. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And basically the first exercise is just something to learn how to get there. And then, of course, we'll build that game in a high-performance programming language specifically for game software, probably not JavaScript. So your specific question is adaptive algorithmic music. Where would that fit in this line? The first project, the Enhanced Edition, there was no soundtrack for Legends of Valor. This was before that they commonly put music in games. That's how old it is. So we'd have to completely redo the audio engineering and music. It would be fun to experiment with algorithmic music at that juncture. So we will definitely look at it. I think there's a lot of really cool things that can be done, both on the sound effects and also in the game soundtrack. And that asset pipeline can be made quite unique and probably machine assisted. The same for generative dialogue. So that's where we're at there. And really excited to see what Martin comes up with. Gary Gygax was a legend. He's now departed, but was one of the greatest minds in role-playing games in the last 50 years and really a pioneer in the entire field. So to work with somebody who knew him on a first-name basis and built a game system with him is going to be a really fun endeavor. This is an interesting one. Dr. Corey's team discovered virus cure, and that is for, I think it's intermessicin or something like that. It's an I can't remember the exact name. It's an anti-parasite drug, and it's used very commonly. In fact, we use it here for my horses because they deworm them with it. And it's been shown that the drug actually stops replication of RNA viruses. And so people have studied it for use with HIV. They've studied it for use with influenza and other things. And it has a reasonable side effect profile. And so a lot of people think it might be reasonable to use it as a prophylaxis for people who are in constant exposure to COVID. School teachers, frontline workers, these types of things. And it may actually have some clinical efficacy. For those of you who don't know, Corey is a critical care pulmonologist, and he founded an organization that specializes in coming up with an evidence-based treatment profile for COVID patients. Pulmonologists are the ones who have the shit stick in this pandemic. They're the ones who are working 12 hours a day in the ICU because by the time the patient needs to see a pulmonologist, they're either ventilated or they're having so much difficulty breathing that they have a very high mortality rate. Some cases greater than 50%, depending upon the group. So they're the ones who are desperate for relief and looking for things to treat things. And he and his colleagues put together a 28-page docket of information and submitted it to the FDA and have been making a lot of noise about this particular drug. And what they believe is that if it was to be prescribed proactively and used early in the treatment, it would massively reduce mortality, like we've seen with dexamethasone and other drugs. And there's actually a great degree of evidence to support that. What's really nasty, however, is that anyone who's been talking about this has been censored. There's been a lot of deplatforming, a lot of people shouting fake news or taking down videos on YouTube and Twitter, which is extraordinary to me. It's a cheap drug. It's been around for quite some time. It's already been used in different antiviral contexts, and the mechanism of action does make some sense. And given that doctors on the front line are using it, and many countries are actually using it and seeing as up to a 30% reduction in mortality, like vitamin D, you'd say that this is a significant therapeutic intervention that really can help people out. What's troubling to me is that the FDA was quick to approve remdesivir, which upon a full preponderance of the medical evidence of remdesivir has shown that it's not particularly efficacious for almost all patients. There might be some categories where mortality is slightly reduced, but not as much as vitamin D or other things with observational studies. So why would you approve a very complex, difficult to manufacture, expensive drug that I think is $5,000 for treatment when you have an anti-parasitic that's been on market for a long time that I can go and buy for my horses and is commonly used in agriculture and in developing countries. In fact, the discoverer of this drug, I believe, won a Nobel Prize in medicine. I'll have to check that. So anyway, I wouldn't say it's a cure. Nothing cures a virus. It's a therapeutic intervention. And the question is it effective and safe? Given that it's already an FDA-approved drug, it seems safe, or at least as safe as the FDA is willing to say for standard treatments. Is it effective? Well, the only way you can know that is through double-blind, placebo-controlled studies. That said, emergency use authorization has been given for dubious things like convalescent blood plasma. So it makes perfect sense to give doctors the discretion there and through observational studies see if it works or not. But that's the reason why I'm not a doctor or a policymaker. I make video games. And let me tell you something. People say cure, 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 cure. There is no such thing as a cure. Get that out of your head. Everybody likes to believe that if a drug just works for them, somehow it's universal. Medicine is very complicated. And the reality is that there's a lot of conflation of circumstantial evidence with causal evidence. So, for example, if you take a drug and then die the next day of a heart attack, many people will have a temptation to say you died of the heart attack because of the drug. It can be completely unrelated. Absolutely, completely unrelated, or it could be causal. And that's why medicine is so complex. And there's a whole field of inquiry that does nothing but try to figure out, is this causing this or not? It's a game of numbers and time. You need large, diverse sets of numbers, and you need lots of time to be able to gradually get to a point where you say something is effective and something is safe. And there's all kinds of things that are quite safe but not effective, things that are effective but not quite safe. And then there's a case-by-case basis. For example, in the treatment of cancer, there's many things that are done to patients which are quite damaging to them, from chemotherapy to other such things, but we deem it necessary because the alternative is certain death. So you say, okay, what do you got to lose? But that would not be the normal treatment protocol. But these vaccines are another example of that in a lesser sense, because the side effect profile of especially these mRNA vaccines is too aggressive. If it was a normal flu vaccine, it would be a commercial dud. Nobody wants to get a vaccine when they get injected and there's a day or two of headaches and fatigue and really sore arm and chills. One person, the chills were so bad it cracked a tooth. That's just not something that you would, under normal circumstance for a normal disease, rush through. You would say, we need to change the dosage, we need to change the schedule, maybe do 3 shots and reduce the dose, or change the formula because we're getting too many adverse reactions. Under emergency use authorization, perfectly fine, because they take that in proportion to what they're seeing with COVID in larger populations. And yes, COVID for certain groups is horrible, especially long COVID. You could permanently lose your taste. There's all kinds of heart neurological issues, vasculitis. And if you're 75 years old, would you rather take fever and chills for 2 days or potential of being ventilated or permanent lung damage? It's like a no-brainer. But for normal disease, this would just not happen. So everything is proportional in medicine as well. And it's important to understand that. So for ivermectin, this is just another example where you say, if we give it to a large group of people, is it going to hurt them? Probably not. For the vast majority of them, it just depends on the individuals and the drug-drug interactions. It doesn't play well with steroids, which is problematic because steroids are used in the standard treatment protocol. But does it have a chance to help them? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but then there's a lot of things. Help them at what intervention? Help them early in the disease onset, later in the disease onset, when they've become a critical care hospitalized ICU patient, help them before they get the disease, preventing them from getting the disease, where in that therapeutic window. So there's no such thing as cure. You have to ask all those questions and think about it, and it's real difficult. Charles, you agree with Frederick to first test local before going to Africa? Looks like you've had your thoughts. I've been in Africa for 3 years. Africa's local for me. I have an office there. We have local employees. We know government officials on a first name basis. We got a great strategy. It's working quite well. The point of diversity is that you can execute different strategies in parallel. So the foundation has a strategy. Emergo has a strategy. For example, Emergo is in India. They're in Indonesia, Malaysia. They're all across Asia. We're heavily in Africa and Eastern Europe and the United States. And the foundation obviously has, because of the people who are there, a good chance of making Fortune 500 progress. We can all do that in parallel. So why not? We don't have to make any compromises. What's the relationship with the European Union? Bank names or projects on the way? I've talked to the EBA. We've talked to people in the UK, like the FCA and so forth. It's too big of an organization. I mean, we get funded from the EU. We are a grant recipient of the Horizons 2020 program. And, there's a lot of great capital there, and there's an overwhelming amount of demand for different things. So there'll be natural growth there. And I think that specialized entities will be able to get things done. There's a lot of development of Cardano that's also done in the EU. From Mark Adra. Ghana is watching you, Charles. We staking ADA here. All right. Accra is a beautiful city. Ghana is one of the most beautiful countries in the world if you have a chance to go there. Wonderful food, great people, very friendly. I went there because once I went to a Ghanaian reggae bar in Osaka, Japan, and I said, boy, I've never been to this country, but if the people are as friendly as this guy's Eddie's bar, I should go. And I went, and they blew me away. So I'm very glad to see we have a community there, and next year I will drop by. Charles, I know you're unable to provide timelines, but could you update the community if the Devnet is looking good for the December 15th release? I think it is looking good. I'll find out more on Monday, and we'll see where we sit. But it is certainly going to be an all-hands-on-deck thing to get done before the Christmas break. Super, 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 super important to me that we get the DevNets done this side of Christmas. And we're even setting up dedicated support people to assist not only with bugs and issues, but also development assistance, including some Solidity developers to help people with their first line of apps. So very important to me, and I really do want to get it done. Do you still plan to make another Security Foundations video? Absolutely. Now do I plan to make it, given that we're developing a special environment for key management, I think that I might update that video a little bit with a really cool ideas. So give me a bit and we'll do something fun with it. Charles Hoskin, true that the reason why no Coinbase listing is due to a high fee. Coinbase does not charge to list tokens. It's completely at their discretion, and there's nothing about that in the decisions. These things will happen at some point. Do you study medicine? I still keep up with a lot of things in the medical community, and I come from a long line of physicians. My uncle's an infectious disease doctor, dad's a doctor, brother's a doctor, grandfather was a doctor. I almost became one. I did a lot of stuff you were supposed to do to walk down that road, but I decided to do different things in life. But I always kept awareness of medicine and close to the heart. And I think we all would benefit by knowing a little bit about medicine as a field and the realities of it. Any partnerships before 2021? Yes. Still got a few things left. Have you commented on Cardano being included in Bitwise 10? As I said, this is going to happen. It's a very organic and natural thing. Right now, there's two big institutional investment macro trends that we're seeing. One is just the acknowledgement that cryptocurrencies are a viable asset class that they're allowed to hold. And the entry point there is usually Bitcoin as a gold alternative. So where they normally would have a commodity like gold, they start using Bitcoin as a store of value or in addition to that. So that's like Michael Saylor and these other big guys like Paul Tudor Johnson and these guys. Okay. Then the next level after they've reached that beachhead and they've come in is saying, well, hang on a second here. There's a war going on between proof of work and proof of stake. And we believe that while proof of work still preserves most of the value in the crypto realm, the cryptoscape, that a large amount of money is going to move from proof of work coins into proof of stake coins. Okay. So then there's the question of, well, who are the winners in that bucket? And that's going to be a portfolio. So there's going to be Polkadot and F2 and EOS and Tezos and yes, Cardano. And it's just a matter of, well, when they create that portfolio, do they do 5% ADA or 10% ADA? And these are the kinds of institutional discussions that are happening right now. And this is where I think organizations like Cardano Foundation could be very useful, having somebody in the investment relations world to kind of help discuss how those regulated products should be properly risked and allocated as people start moving from one side to the other side. So Bitwise 10 is a good example of that. Weiss is another example of just a ratings agency creating a rating system. You need this for the markets in order to de-risk themselves and properly diversify. Who are the guys in the photo behind you? That's the album cover for Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here. It's my favorite album from them. Do you actively talk to billionaires about Cardano? Oh, I do. Many, many, many of them. More than 11. Are you personally afraid of getting COVID? No. One of the things that you learn when you travel abroad, especially to developing countries that have endemic diseases that are quite nasty, like I've been throughout Africa, and there they have malaria and things like loss of fever and all kinds of horrible things that are quite bad. Like there are certain places where they have hantavirus outbreaks and 30% mortality rate, is you develop a sense of proportionality and you say, okay, for me, the things I do, am I high risk, mid risk, low risk? And if I do contract this, what's the progression look like? And honestly, how problematic is this going to be for me? Now, 33 years old, reasonably good shape, reasonably healthy, and my nutrition's good, take my vitamin D. So if I was to contract COVID, the odds are I would barely notice it. That's just a fact. Most people who contract it are asymptomatic or have mild symptoms, as we are seeing through antibody analysis and extrapolation. Now, the problem is that we live in a media environment where fear porn has been turned up to 11, and they have convinced every single person they can that if you contract COVID, it's going to leave permanent, devastating damage to you. And even if you survive, you're going to have long COVID, lose your taste, not be able to get out of bed, not be able to go to the bathroom without assistance. There's a middle ground between recognizing proportionality and risk to yourself and living in this fear bizarro world where we have to fear each other and everybody's out to get you and so forth. And it's just saying, okay, reasonable precautions can be taken until the high-risk individuals are de-risked. Then it does make sense to have some preventive health measures for their protection. Okay. And they don't have to be draconian. They can just simply be avoid large gatherings, wash hands, wear a mask, these types of things. And if we just did that, it would slow the spread of the disease to a point where therapeutics and vaccination programs can completely de-risk the at-risk people, in which case those preventive measures, those slow spread measures are no longer necessary and they should go away. The problem is that we just can't do that as a society. There's just too much loss of trust in institutions. There's too much anger, and then there's too much double standard that exists. If you have a family member die, you can't have a large funeral. When a civil rights leader dies, they can have a 10,000 person funeral. When you want to get your hair, cut and cleaned and styled, you can't go to the hair salon, but political leaders can. You can't have Thanksgiving, but political leaders can. You can't travel, but political leaders can go to Cabo. And there are hundreds of these examples throughout. We can't have large gatherings unless they're politically motivated with one particular ideology. If you're of another ideology, you're going to die of the virus and it's a super spreading event. If it's another ideology, totally fine, not going to public health problem, and so forth. When you politicize an event, you lose the ability to manage the event, because no matter what makes sense from a common sense and a practical everyday mechanism, you now have to look at everything through a political lens. And if whatever you're told doesn't agree with the political ideology you hold, everything goes to hell. And all authority figures lose all credibility. And this is the greatest tragedy, I think, of COVID. There were ways in the early days of this pandemic to be able to mitigate it to a point where it would have not been problematic, as Taiwan did, and Vietnam did, and other nations like New Zealand did. Do that. Now, basic facts, like if you inoculate, vaccinate everybody over the age of 55, just do that. 92% of those who die will no longer die. Just that one thing. And those are numbers from the Centers for Disease Control. When you look at the raw COVID mortality rate. And many of you point out, oh, well, how do we know those are real COVID deaths? Because if you die COVID positive, regardless of how you died, that's still reported as a COVID death. Another example of politicization, another example of distrust in institutions. It's actually a valid concern. You should separate statistics and look at people whose primary cause of death was COVID versus statistics where they happen to be COVID positive while they died. And they tell a very different story, actually, when that's done. That said, this is still a nasty disease. You have to live in the middle when you look at these things. It does exist. And for those who have problems with it, they're horrendous. And there are still people who wear oxygen 9 months after catching it. There's still people, their taste hasn't returned. There's still people with heart damage. There's still people with brain damage and other problems. And these are terrible, terrible problems. And we're going to have hundreds of thousands of people running around after this pandemic is over in the United States who have permanent disabilities as a consequence of contracting COVID. Not a good situation at all. So it does exist, and it is a problem, but there is proportionality. And the shaming, the brutal attacks that people have done, the virtue signaling of, well, you're not wearing a mask. The governor of Wyoming got COVID. They brutally attacked him. The governor of Colorado, who was always wearing a mask and always, he and his husband both got COVID. You know, it's a highly infectious, novel viral agent. With avian flu, 90 million Americans were infected. Everybody gets infected with these things. Mask or not, just slows the spread down. I think in the future, we need to take a step back and say, moving forward, what is the long-term social response to this? First off, any pandemic-causing pathogen, the vast majority of them can be vaccinated against. As a consequence, we can pre-make all the 1 and 2 clinical trials for most of those, so that if we ever get into a pandemic, we can bring a vaccine to market in 3 to 4 months. Second, we need to have an honest conversation in the United States about vaccine hesitancy. Some of this is propaganda spread by Russians and Chinese and other actors specifically to attempt to damage society, because they understand if we retard in vaccine rates, what that means is that we're going to have a slower economic recovery. So it's a high impact, low cost attack. So you just spread a bunch of junk. The vaccines kill people. The vaccines cause cancer. The vaccines cause HIV. The vaccines change your genes. The vaccines are part of a New World Order conspiracy. The vaccines are going to cause permanent health consequences and so forth. And a lot of people just deeply, deeply, deeply believe that. Some people, for religious reasons, they say, oh, the vaccines have fetal DNA and tissue and other things in them. How would an mRNA vaccine have that? It makes no sense at all. You make them synthetically in a lab. They have nothing to do with that. But we have Catholic bishops saying that to their parishioners and saying you cannot get inoculated because it's against our religious principles. So we have to have a serious national conversation. And the reality is that we will not be able to restore trust in these things until institutional trust is restored. So vaccine hesitancy is a symptom, not a root cause of a broader social problem of people just simply don't trust their government. And to be frank, why should they? The US government in particular has repeatedly lied to all of us again and again and again and again. From the Iraq War, weapons of mass destruction. Oh, well, I guess they didn't have that. To Obamacare, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. There's a million lies, small and large, and it's gotten to a point where there's bipartisan agreement that our institutions are pathological liars, and there's no accountability, and when they commit problems, they create issues, there's no punishment for that. So they say, let's say there's a 5% chance that these vaccines are problematic. If that is the case, there's no liability. Nobody will go to jail. No one will go out of business. No politician will lose their job. He'll just move on and say, oh, well. You can't operate a society where people are given a mandate to lie to the mainstream. They get away with that. And then when their lies result in harm or damage to society, there's no recourse for that. That's how you get a civil war. And that's where we're marching towards. It's every election cycle, it gets worse and worse and worse. So above and beyond what we need to do to get out of this, the next thing we need to do is really have a serious conversation about institutions and how the hell are we going to restore faith in institutions, if that's even possible or not. And number 3, I think everybody has to be aware that the world is complex and nuanced, and we do need institutions to navigate it. In the olden days, before mainstream society, we had religion. That was the anchor that allowed people to navigate complex existence. Why did this happen? Because God said so, good or bad. The Dark Ages, these other things, they had a religious way of looking at the world for scientific, medical, political, and economic and warfare consequences. Okay. Then we moved into the Enlightenment, and then suddenly society said to figure out complexity, you have to use a scientific method, and you have to use thinking tools and deductive reasoning, and you can gradually put pieces together and figure out how things are running. We have now moved to a post-Enlightenment where the world has become too complex for anyone to understand. I can't understand it. Bill Gates can't understand it. Elon Musk can't understand it. It's too complex and interdependent, interconnected. Okay, there's so much going on. Cosmological things going on, aerospace things going on, biological things, computer science. The rate of innovation is doubling every 18 months. It's crazy. There's too much data. The point of institutions is to handle that complexity. You create institutions to manage and handle complexity. I build a business to do business at a scale that I cannot do. I build a hospital to provide medical care to people on a scale that a doctor cannot do. Okay? Small, large, gargantuan institutions are there to get things done. People don't trust institutions. There's a social regression, and what they need to do then is look at complex things as simple and get black and white answers. Cure, no care. Lethal, not lethal. Enemy, friend. In my camp, out of my camp. Good actor, bad actor. And you can't do that. You'll have a horrible outcome if you go down that way, and you end up having highly polarized people who Dunning-Kruger their way throughout life, and they end up hating each other for crazy reasons, and just honestly deep in their core believing that the world works in a very simple way. It does not. So it is super important for the durability and survivability of the human race. We find a way to restore faith in institutions so that we can deal with the complexity of the 21st century. And if we cannot do that, well, then we're done as a species. The only way to manage society will be extinction or dictatorship. That's a good question. How do you explain the Cardano project and its mission in a few minutes to someone not engaged in the cryptocurrency space or even the financial sector? I think the easiest way of explaining it is that the world is going through an upgrade where we're going to go from a split system to a unified system. Right now, we have two systems, the developed world and developing world system. The developed world system has banks, insurance, credit, it has identity. You can do business online. You can build trust with people, manage risk, and be able to grow wealth. So any person born in a developed world country, if they work very hard, has a good chance of getting to a point where they can retire and have a good life. That means a life where they have food, water, shelter. They're able to pursue things that make them happy and have enough left over that when they become weak and vulnerable, their savings can cover them to pay for those infirmities. When you look at the developing world, for no fault of their own, they live in systems where wealth creation is very difficult. Even if you have some of it, because you can't insure it and hedge it, when an event happens, be it a war or a natural event like a hurricane or a tsunami, they get completely wiped out. So the world is upgrading so that we'll have a unified system where all 7 billion people, 8 billion people live under one financial operating system. So your identity is interoperable and universal. You can get a loan no matter who you are, where you're at. You can get insurance no matter where you're at. You can do business with anyone in the world in a friction-free way. The point of Cardano is to acknowledge that this must be done with principles. So what are we trying to accomplish? We're trying to push power to the edges and put you in charge of your own money, put you in charge of your own identity, put you in charge of your own voice, and give you governance and these types of things. So that when we get to that universal system, we get to an open, decentralized, principled system that can't be co-opted, highly resilient to people who try to come and tamper with it. And then suddenly the richest people in the world, the Jeff Bezoses of the world, will use the same system as the poorest people in the world. And both of them will have a better system than the system that came before it in both of those old systems. That's what we're trying to accomplish with it. That's not a short answer, Charles. Well, she said a few minutes. That was a few minutes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Is Ouroboros Chronos implemented? This always happens with Molten Tar Monster number 3. So when Chico Crypto does a video, he'll criticize some arbitrary part of our system. And the criticism's just out there. And he's, oh, well, we use a central clock, and that central clock is not used by Polkadot, therefore Cardano bad. Well, so does ETH2. NTP and these things like it, if they break, the entire internet breaks. So don't you think that's reliable infrastructure that's going to be around and useful? And there are, of course, many recovery mechanisms if there was an NTP problem. It is not a practical vector of attack for a reasonable scale system. Now, we'd like to be reliant on no thing and no one and as decentralized as possible. So we were the first to address this in the very first paper of its kind with something called Ouroboros Chronos. But it would be an unnecessary diversion to just go and chase 3 months of implementation to pull Chronos in when we don't need it as a system. Right now, there's still federation in the system. You still have OAPFT nodes working with the stake pools and making some of the blocks. So until March, you still have that reality. You still have relay nodes and these types of things. There's an order process that you have to go through. The other thing is that Chronos should be implemented with Redux, should be implemented with Genesis, and should be implemented with fast finality and high throughput enhancements to the system. So Ouroboros 2, a roll-up of all the research that we've done, which will make it considerably better than anything in market. So the name of deployment execution is saying, what is a problem today? What's a theoretical but unlikely issue versus what is a practical and certainly problematic issue to resolve? And understanding how to balance things and create a roadmap accordingly. YouTube jockeys don't do that for a living. They just sit, get a surface level understanding of something, and brutally attack people based on that surface understanding. For example, his analysis of Mantis. Oh, there's only 9 nodes running. Mantis was never released as a production system. It was always a proof of concept experiment. And we got the code base to a point where people could use it, but we never released it as a product. We never productized it. We never advertised it. So that's like saying, oh, well, this experiment you did in the lab, no one is using that experiment. Well, yeah, it's a lab experiment. It's a proof of concept to demonstrate we could do something, and we're reusing it in different things, like, for example, with the Devnets. And now we're, for the first time ever, actually productizing Mantis and bringing it out into Ethereum Classic. Was that mentioned? No, because this is what a YouTube jockey does. They take a small sliver of something and then try to convince you that is everything and leave out key facts that would radically change the entire story and argument. And any person who listens to him, at this point, shame on you. You're the idiot, not him. He knows exactly what he's doing, and he knows how to do that to mess with people. It's 2020. We've been working on Cardano since 2015. First time I've ever heard anybody complain about the clock. We wrote the first paper about it. And this is a distributed systems conversation. The very first paper that Leslie Lamport wrote, I think in the 1960s, was on clocks. It's a very, very well understood long arc problem in systems theory, distributed systems theory. And it just blows my mind that a YouTube jockey can make a video and then I get asked over and over again, what are you going to do about this centralized clock? Oh my God, it's as if like there's one server out there and that server goes down and Cardano goes down. No, you idiots. That's not the case. That's not how it works at all. And if the internet breaks, then how does Cardano run at all? Because your ISPs go down. So what, you have your own ISP? And they say, oh, but we need to be decentralized in everything. Well, what if there's a hardware backdoor inside your Intel processor and your AMD processor. I guess we should go to RISC-V and only deploy there. But how can we trust the fabricator? Yeah, well, we got to make our own processors. We got to fabricate them ourselves. But how do we know that the raw materials are right? Well, let's go to the beach and grab our own sand off of it and, dope our own silicon. I mean, how insane do you want to be going down this road? You need some notion of trust somewhere, either in your operating system, your hardware, that the internet is going to work properly, especially core protocols that run the entire internet. And if you don't have any of that trust, crypto doesn't work for Bitcoin or for any of these systems. Sorry, it just doesn't work. Your secret keys can't be kept private. So you might as well just buy gold and not have a computer all around and live like the Unabomber in Montana. From Gianfranco Diaz, he says, "Hi Charles, would you say an AI singularity is a concern? A lot of bright people seem to think that. This is an example of what we term existential technology. Okay, in the 20th century, the very first existential technology invented were nuclear weapons. The first time ever, we had a platform that, if it was misused, would end in the extinction of the entire human race, or such a radical destruction it would set us back like an asteroid would set us back, or something like that, or a super volcano going off. It would really end the world. And in the 21st century, we see multiple existential concerns at the same time. Coronavirus has really made it clear to the world that pandemics happen. And we as a species have gotten super lucky that the pandemics of the last 2 centuries have been relatively mild. Okay. Spanish flu, it was 20 million people. Okay, but it's only a few percentage points of the global population. All right. We had the misfortune that it was spread on the back of a world war, so it really got it out there. But the Black Death in the 14th century, it killed, over a period of a few hundred years, a third of the entire population of Europe. A third. You line up 3 people, 1 dies. Okay, very bad situation. So historically, there's been smallpox pandemics. There's been all kinds of things, like the famous plagues in Athens during the Peloponnesian War, or the Justinian plague when he was trying to reconquer Western Europe. All of these things have been just devastating to mankind. And actually, during Marcus Aurelius, there was a smallpox outbreak that probably was one of the principal reasons for the long-term decline of the Western Roman Empire. So, existential concern: what happens when CRISPR and genetic engineering, these things come into play, and it's really low cost for a small team of people, 5 people, to have a conspiracy and invent in a lab a virus that is as lethal as Ebola, but has the contagion and spreading dynamics of corona or measles. Okay, what if you build in that it takes a real long time, 2-3 weeks, while you're infectious but asymptomatic? That tail would be absolutely catastrophic, because by the time it kills you, you've already spread it to 16 people or 17 people, and then keeps going and keeps going, and it can just spread to the world like wildfire, strategically released. So biotech is getting to the point where it could be existential. There's things called gene drives that can permanently alter the genome of an entire species. And for example, they're experimenting with mosquitoes to exterminate them this way. You could sterilize an entire species in a few generations. So that's biotechnology. Then you have nanotech, and there's a whole collection of existential technologies that will become evident in the 21st century. AI is an existential technology. At some point, we'll reach a threshold where an AI gets enough capabilities that it is able to start doing what it's told to do in ways that could be counterproductive to us. So, Stuart Russell writes a lot about this in his books. He did the Bible of AI, but then he also wrote a great book. The title escapes me for the moment, which discusses I think it's the problem of control. It discusses basically how do you build a useful AI that does the things that we have objectives around, but doesn't go ahead and optimize in ways to harm humanity. The gray goo problem or these types of things. So I think it's a huge concern, and it's an undervalued thing. Humans tend to underestimate and be myopic to longer term existential problems, and they tend to overestimate and overreact to local concerns in the time horizon. We have invested more effort into coronavirus than in any other human endeavor since World War II, collectively. The threat of coronavirus is minuscule to the threat of artificial intelligence, but no one talks about it on a global scale. So it's a definite concern because we don't have the right people in the room. Governments are not aligned in a way, and incentives are built in a way to have private siloed AIs that will eventually evolve to a point where they cause existential problems for people. And there are other existential technologies as well. Spacefaring and asteroid mining, for example. Eventually, it'll work to a point where somebody can tow an asteroid from the asteroid belt and crash it to Earth if they wanted to. That could end the entire human species, actually end all species on the planet. That's what got the dinosaurs. So all kinds of things could be done. And 21st century is the first century where we have technology to go down that road. We also have these issues with transhumanism where people begin augmenting themselves. Like, for example, brain-computer interfaces and genetic engineering. It's like Gattaca meets cyberpunk, and it's going to be a wild ride. And if your social systems can't account for that, the strife and unrest of metahumans is going to cause huge problems in the 21st century. There's great people like Yuval Harari write about it, and a lot of good philosophers write about it as well. And unfortunately, governments are not structured in a way to actually be able to deal with these problems. Charles, thoughts on Wall Street listing futures on water, first time ever. When Mad Max, I am buying an atmospheric water generator. It does 50,000 liters per day. I have 250 kilowatts of solar capacity I'm installing here on the farm, and I'll be able to make my own water. I just don't trust the government anymore. They're just incompetent and evil, and they just do horrible things. And so I have no faith in their ability to ensure proper supply chains. And so I'm in a position economically where I can protect myself and those I care about, but it just makes me sad. Water is a human right. There's nothing more fundamental than that, than perhaps air. And the fact that it's being turned into a commodity, and now we're going to have water scarcity when 70% of the planet's covered by it, it's really just an energy question, is extraordinary to me. Absolutely extraordinary to me. And disgusting. And it's another example of colossal mismanagement. Galen asks, hi, Charles. Do you like magnets? I do. In fact, I am creating a ferromagnetic fluid sculpture for the IOG office here in Colorado. And we're going to start working on that in March. It's going to be a lot of fun. Ferromagnetic fluid, for those of you who don't know, is black fluid that has a lot of iron in it. And when you run a magnetic field with it, it actually changes shape and form. And you can build beautiful sculptures with it. It's used in dynamic suspension systems, and it was created by NASA for the moon rover way back in the day. Hi, Charles from Cebu, Philippines. Glad to see that we have some Filipinos in the audience. Glad I caught this one live. Well, I'm glad that you did. Another example of the things I was mentioning earlier, vaccines kill, right? Loss of trust in institutions does this. I really sincerely believe this person absolutely believes that. Just believes it to their core and read a lot of stuff and did his research, and there's no way you can convince them. It's lost. They're propagandized. Bees on the ranch. Yes, I am planning on actually having some hives. My father works with an endocrinologist who does honeymead. He's one of the top guys in Wyoming to do that. And so next time when I go on up, I'll see if I can arrange a time to go sit down with him and talk about apiculture. We also, because we are in Ethiopia, have a lot of exposure there. They have a honey wine that they make there. So there's a huge amount of bee and honey production. And Ethiopia is one of the few countries where there's a net increase in the bee population instead of a decrease. Vaccines do cause death in a small number of patients. Okay, how many? If you're aware of the statistic or you honestly believe that, then how many? And if you have to go back 70 years to a polio trial where a few people died to say that that's indicative of all vaccinations, you're an idiot. Just don't get it. You know, the reality is that most vaccines cause no problems at all for society. And there are certain vaccines that have been made that probably are a little difficult, like Biothrax for anthrax, the yellow fever vaccine, rabies vaccinations. They're problematic, but they don't normally kill you. The vast majority of people receive them have no problem at all. We inoculate hundreds of millions of people every year in the United States for a variety of things from tetanus to the flu. If they're poison, then shouldn't we all be dying at this point? And, you know, when you believe these things, again, no proportionality. Go back to the 19th century with measles, mumps, rubella, all the childhood ailments, all of the communicable diseases that we didn't have the ability to vaccinate away. It was a fact of life. As a parent, you would have to have 7 kids because 3 or 4 of them would die before the age of 18 from these types of conditions, especially in urbanized locations. That was human existence. That was human life in that time period. It's been a miracle, vaccination, mass vaccination, absolute miracle. And people are so convinced that these things are poison. Not in my body. You put things in your body every single day, most of the time, much higher risk. How do you know your alcohol was properly manufactured? Well, I trust the company. Well, vaccines are made by big multinational companies. Your alcohol usually is too. How do you know your food is high quality? Well, the FDA regulates that, protects me, but they regulate vaccines. So the New World Order and the cabal is really interested to make sure the vaccines are toxic and destroy you and sterilize you and kill your kids and give you autism. But they'll let the food supply be okay. Unless you're completely conspiratorial, in which case, no, the food is poison too. So you have to grow your own food? Come on. You get in your car. How do you know your car is going to work? How do you know your brake's going to work? Oh, there's regulation. Well, but you can't trust the government. Regulators not working. No, your brakes are going to break anytime. And they're evil corporations. So, you know, you're going to hit it. You're going to be on the highway. They're not going to work. You're going to go and die. Or a hacker will hack into your car, take it over, and kill you. Okay, risk is proportional. They say, oh, but liability, you know, what do we do? Okay, you want expensive vaccines or you want cheap vaccines? You want cheap vaccines, you're going to have a different liability structure. You want expensive vaccines, built into the cost of the vaccination is the ability to deal with it. Because here's what happens. The person gets vaccinated, the next day they die of a heart attack. The family says the vaccine caused the heart attack. There's no medical evidence of it. Some of them will sue the vaccine manufacturer. If there's no profit in vaccination or low profit vaccination, 50,000 of those cases every year on a global scale are enough to bog down a small to mid-sized vaccine company in litigation. So you need to provide liability protection to them if you want mass vaccination. Otherwise, you have to let them charge $500 a dose to be able to build up an economic moat to take the hit from the family that does that. I'm sorry. It's just, this is an example where critical thinking is not working properly, and conspiratorial thinking has overtaken an entire group of people. And you take drugs, the supplements you take. How do you know the supplements are safe? I'm researching supplements right now for mushrooms to create lion's mane supplements. There's very little regulation there. I don't have to do broad scale inspections and these other things to put something in your body. And you go to the health food store, you see thousands of supplements all across, some from small companies, where there can be all kinds of contamination in them. You take all these prescription drugs, the antibiotics you take, those are devastating to your microbiome, far more harmful in many cases than anything a vaccine is going to do for you. It's all about there's ethylene glycol or this thing in the vaccine. There's that and millions of consumer products all around that people touch, interact with every single day. You know, but there's allergic reactions people have. Yeah, the 2 allergic reactions that were in the UK, those allergic reactions were from people who have to carry EpiPens because their allergies are so bad that things trigger them all the time, and they have to go ahead and inject themselves, or their throat will close up and they die. There's plenty of people running around where that's the case. Stands to reason they're going to have a hard time with that. And what do we say? If you have that lifestyle, don't take it. Proportionality, it matters. And if you can't adopt it, you can't live in a complex world. And if you can't live in a complex world, you must regress to a simple one, or you must outsource to institutions to take care of you. What are you going to do? Yes, I take lion's mane every day. It's a great drug. What are your thoughts on airdrops and burning tokens? Everybody knows how I feel about burning ADA, and I don't know why people keep asking. There is no giant pool of unallocated ADA floating out there. Every ADA in circulation belongs to somebody. So if you're asking about burning of ADA, you have to immediately follow that up with, whose ADA do you want to burn? Now, I had some people reach out to me over Telegram saying that I should burn my own ADA. Okay, I guess I don't deserve to be paid for the work I do. I'm a physician and read literally thousands of vaccine papers. Most are not properly controlled. Side effects are not looked into for longer than a few weeks. CDC gets paid millions in options. Okay, Eric, well, as a physician, you tell me, what side effects have you seen? And they've actually been correlated and well understood. And also, as a physician, you tell me all the drugs you prescribe on a day-to-day basis, how many of those have problematic side effects? We live in a country where 80 million people have insulin resistance. And when they go and get type 2 diabetes, we put them on insulin to treat it. Think about that. And the catastrophic health consequences and multi-systemic problems from Alzheimer's to heart disease to atherosclerosis that's caused by it. And the problem is vaccination. The FDA has recused itself, as has many institutions in public health, from much broader, far more problematic issues than mass vaccination. And I don't see the mechanisms that are going to cause serious problems. Oh my God, swine flu in 1975. We had Gideon Beret. Some issues here for a few people, 1 out of 100,000 or something like that. And then that somehow is extrapolated to say all these things. As a doctor, you probably get a flu shot every year. Most hospitals require their staff to do that. You know, I'm sorry, this is not the problem in medicine. You are fully and keenly aware of that. There are much larger problems from the way that drugs are developed and distributed. I'm sickened, for example, as you should be, that remdesivir is $5,000 a dose, and it was an orphan drug. It was developed for Ebola. And then they somehow magically repurpose it to be a not really efficacious treatment of corona. And apparently that's great. But then all of the other treatments we have, like ivermectin and vitamin D and so forth, are completely ignored or trivialized or attacked when they're over the counter and are made at cost. So there's much bigger problems in medicine. You should be definitely aware of that. I don't think vaccine safety or efficacy is the issue here. The worst case scenario, you're giving people a dud. But for the vast majority of symptoms and side effects, they show up in the first 60 days. And it's very clear when these things happen. Like the rotavirus vaccine, the symptoms and side effects showed up in the first 90 days. The mechanism is autoimmune stimulation. Then months later, autoimmune diseases pop up to clinical relevance, and no one can make the connection because they're not doing long-term controlled studies. Okay, yeah, well, they do follow people in a normal vaccine trial for at least 2 years to 5 years, depending on the vaccine. Like the Ebola vaccine, for example, I think they followed for 3 years there. And the incidence of autoimmune conditions was not statistically significant. Yes, for example, with Pfizer alone, there were 4 cases of Bell's palsy that occurred, and in the AstraZeneca vaccine, there were some issues of, there were some neurological issues that came up. I can't remember the exact issues they had there. But it's difficult to create a causal relationship here and say this is creating autoimmune conditions. I would much rather argue that a large chunk of the autoimmune conditions we have are environmental or diet related. And there's a litany of issues that are coming there. Why? Because we've seen a much higher incidence of autoimmune conditions over the last 50 years as we've moved from a balanced normal human diet to high carb, low fat, high sugar diets. And everybody's getting insulin resistance, and it's creating tons of autoimmune issues. I don't think mass vaccination has caused that problem at all. Now, it's certainly possible that it could be the case, but then it behooves to look at the statistical significance of it. And if it was the case, then we should definitely be able to notice that in the data somewhere. Yeah, exactly. Bell's palsy was outside normal percentage. There was only 4 cases, and it was statistically insignificant. What are your thoughts on Gavin Wood during the time you worked with one another? He's a brilliant guy, and he's very good at writing code, and he's very good leading engineers. And people like working with him, or they hate working with him. He's a very polarizing guy, and I'm very polarizing as well. So some days we get along, some days we don't get along. Polkadot is based on principles from Ouroboros-Prowse with some changes that they made. And so they obviously read our work and understand our work. And, I've worked on a Polkadot related project. We use parity substrate for polymesh. So I think they're one of the good guys in terms of blockchain companies. They contribute to the space and they do good work there. And there's been many missteps, as I have made. And, markets litigate those missteps. Did Polkadot really copy the Cardano platform? Yes and no. I mean, there's inspiration from some of the things that we've done, but there's a lot of originality there as well. Again, this is an example of where when you can't deal with complexity and you have simplicity, you always try to regress and say, Bob copied Alice. They clearly read the Ouroboros-Prowse paper. That's self-evident, and they freely admit that, and they clearly made original contributions on the economic and other components of that protocol. So there's inspiration there. There's inspiration in Cardano from Algorand. There's inspiration in Cardano from 100 other sources, some that predate cryptocurrencies. So I wouldn't say they copied us. I think that there was inspiration there. And, we read the parachain design, and there's actually some merit to parachains. There's a lot of things that we'd like to play with. And I think that's a feature, not a bug. When they say Charles is polarizing, you have to be really passionate in polarizing to be a change maker and a leader of a movement. because your movement, until it becomes successful and self-evident, is going to always be viewed as the outsider and the underdog, and you're going to be attacked and attacked and attacked, and they say, how dare you not follow orthodoxy? So the kind of leader that you need to get the movement to mainstream is fundamentally different than the kind of leader that you need to manage your mainstream success. So the things that made Bill Gates a phenomenal CEO and building up Microsoft to become a dominant force were actually problematic when the name of the game for Microsoft was being custodial. And it turns out Satya Nadella is a massively better CEO at that than Bill was during the 2000s, when he was kind of like the holstered emperor with Steve Ballmer. So every era of a project needs a different type of personality. And in the early days, you really need somebody who's willing to endure a lot of suffering and pain and get his ass kicked and say crazy stuff and push and push and push. But then that person paradoxically also has to understand their time is finite and prepare for custodians to come and help manage the successes as they come and hand those successes to them. And if you do that well, you have a beautiful, well-balanced ecosystem. Yeah, this one right here, Bill Gates with the vomit. You know, there's Bill Gates that I knew, and there's the Bill Gates of today. I don't know what happened to Bill. The Bill Gates I knew was a vicious, relentless capitalist who hated to lose and was extremely good at dominating a market and just winning. And it could be Internet Explorer, it could be Office, it could be Windows' proliferation, and he just was really good at all of that. Somewhere along the way, Bill Gates became a humanitarian, and the game completely changed for him. And he started wearing the sweater every day, even if it's 90 degrees outside, and doing his thing. And Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is so vast; it's almost like a government agency at this point because it has so much money. You give away tens of millions of dollars every day to Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It's like you don't normally do that in a charity. That's a government agency that does this type of a thing. And he's really enjoying his retirement, and he has a diverse set of interests. Now, you can always debate, are the use of funds adequate? Are they being used in a wise way? Is he focusing on the right problems and so forth? But you know what? He's the guy who made all the money. So it's his prerogative on how he spends it, where he spends it, and what he does with it. So the issue he has is that he doesn't seem to care at all about certain dimensions of public relations. There's a perception, and it's not a small perception, of people believing that Bill is part of a large New World Order conspiracy to massively depopulate the human race and murder hundreds of millions of people. Now, he can play the victim and say he's completely blameless in this, but people are innately suspicious of extremely powerful, extremely wealthy, unaccountable people whose motives are not completely clear, who operate in a not super transparent way. And he's not accountable to anybody like a government agency would be. And as a consequence, he can do things that normal people can't. And I see those things in Africa, for example, the creation of the Agricultural Transformation Agency. A private citizen usually can't approach a government and say, yeah, I'm just going to create something to solve your starvation problem. I'll pay for it and reports to the prime minister. Here's the check for it. Get it done tomorrow. Here's the guy to lead it. And when you have that kind of superpower, if people don't understand the motives of the person with that superpower, they're inclined to believe nefarious actions and activity. If he was really cognizant and aware of how problematic that is, then what Bill should do is ditch the sweater and go on the Rogan effect, Joe Rogan, and go and actually engage people and talk to real human beings, not the Davos crowd at the World Economic Forum and South by Southwest and major elite parties and hanging out with presidents, but everyday people. Contrast Bill Gates with Elon Musk. Elon is just as rich at this point, and he's literally building a company to put neurological implants into your brain. When we talk about Bill depopulating people with like nanobots and vaccines, it's out there. Like Elon is literally drilling holes into people's skulls and putting shit into your brain that can influence your brain. And people are totally chill with Elon Musk. Why? because they get Elon Musk. They feel a relationship with Elon Musk. They kind of understand where this guy's coming from. They see him in a way that they don't see Bill. For example, Bill had tremendous problems with the US government in the 1990s with the antitrust issues, as Mark Zuckerberg is now going through. Kind of a modern day Bill Gates. And not once did Bill go to the media and lament and really spill everything out and say, God, these guys suck. And he didn't show humanity. He did what all Fortune 500 CEOs do. Elon Musk has problems with his Fremont plant making Teslas. And he thinks this whole coronavirus lockdown thing is just horseshit. So what does he do? He goes to Twitter and complains about it. And then says, if you guys don't get your act together, I'm moving to Texas. And he follows through on it. When you do those things, it humanizes you and builds a relationship, and people understand you at least enough to kind of get a sense of your motives. And so when you do things like build missiles and rockets, and you do things like make cars and solar power and batteries and these types of things, it in a way makes that understandable, and people are okay with it. SpaceX, if Elon Musk acted like Bill Gates, would probably be one of the most conspiratorial companies. A huge chunk of their revenue comes from secret government launches and projects with the Air Force and other things. Elon probably does hold a top secret clearance and has access to a lot of very proprietary information that's very, very secret squirrel stuff. There would be alien conspiracies to the max with SpaceX if Elon didn't have that relationship. I don't understand why Bill Gates' people and Bill Gates himself doesn't get this. And if he was just to go on Joe Rogan's show, just to engage with these people, just to actually humanize himself and get rid of the sweater and the polished demeanor and so forth, a lot more people would trust him. And if a lot more people trust him, I think he could be so much more effective. And this is actually a valid point here. It says Bill Gates is a New World Order thug. If you are cynical, you'd say the reason why he can't do that is that he's not genuine. He's not a real person. And that's the problem. If you live in the shadows or you decide not to have transparency, you own that label, as George Soros does and the Koch brothers do and other people who work via proxy. Do you believe in aliens? You know, one thing I've noticed, I won't tell you who in my company, but there's a very high-ranking person in my company who is firmly convinced that aliens are a thing. And it sends me stuff all the time on the latest and greatest. And for a long time, I didn't really care about it. But I have noticed that there is a bit of priming that's happening in the global consciousness about the existence of aliens. You had that 87-year-old Israeli guy who used to run their space program say, hey, there's actually this galactic federation. And then you have all these UFO videos. And then you have the Air Force actually talking about it. You have the creation of the Space Force and these things. So, you know, as a thought experiment, let's say that you're a world leader and aliens do exist. And you're trying to figure out, how do I tell the world without creating chaos? What would you do? The most logical thing to do would be slowly but surely priming the world to actually be okay with the existence of aliens and leaking more and more and more and seeing reactions, like these UFO videos that could have been still stayed as classified but were declassified, and letting more and more people talk about it from the edges and then gradually bringing it into the mainstream. So I'm not saying they exist. I'm just saying that what's happening right now would be clearly evident with an effort to get people ready for such a big event. Hey, Charles, do you think robotics and automation may replace human labor and have unwanted results? Yeah, Andrew Yang certainly thinks, though. It's That's why all the UBI people are pushing really heavily for UBI, because they say automation is going to kill us. There is definitely 3 classes of automation. I think within the next 20 years, they're going to have a profound impact on employment. Autonomous vehicles is one category. Eventually, helper robots are going to evolve to a point where they're actually capable of walking and interacting. So for cleaning jobs, service industry jobs, and these types of things, there's going to be a huge impact there. And 3, augmentation of skilled labor for the trades. So the vast majority of things you do in the trades, from carpentry work to plumbing work to electrical work, if you're at a point where you can make fries or operate a cash register as a robot, you probably can do that skilled labor very well. In fact, in many cases, much better than a human being can. You never get tired. You make precise measurements. You have very sophisticated optics and these types of things. You don't have the independent thought, so you have to be supervised and managed by somebody. But that's definitely going to be doable. 20 years, that's here. Now, if you sum up the jobs in those sectors and say, well, will automation kill that? You could be losing 50 million jobs in the United States from those 3 categories. So I do think there is a big, big issue with that. And the problem with wealth distribution, when you have automation, a small group of capitalists will be able to buy that labor to replace human labor at a huge competitive advantage. And that wealth will not trickle down. Because at least when you're hiring people, there's trickle down. If you have just robots, there's no trickle down. There's a hyper capitalization. So usually you see UBI and wealth tax bundled together for these types of things. I don't believe in wealth tax. I think it's theft. I think UBI makes sense when you have sovereign wealth funds. It does not make sense in a debt and deficit culture. If you have a massive national debt, what the fuck are you doing printing money to give money to people? Makes no sense, because the inflation is actually going to exceed whatever paltry handouts you're giving to society as a whole. But if you have a $1.5 trillion sovereign wealth fund like Norway does, distribute the dividends to your people. Good fiscal management. Won't debase your currency, and it'll do a lot of good. You'll get a lot of velocity out of that money, especially for the poor people, and really help your economy. So it's a mixed bag. Have you ever heard of Jacques Fresco, the founder of the Venus Project, resource-based economy, where blockchains play a very role? He actually came to my alma mater years ago, CU Boulder. He's dead now, but Jacques had a lot of really cool ideas, and I think he was well ahead of his time. And there's actually things like the open ecology movement and other things that are kind of corollaries to what he was talking about. And it's a really exciting thing to see this grow. What's your opinion about DeepMind solving the protein folding problem? Just another example of when you apply really sophisticated, very precise tools to a very well-defined problem, you'll end up getting unorthodox solutions. The nose cone, for example, on the Shinkansen in Japan was designed by genetic algorithms. So these are all kinds of things that you can do when you have these tools to solve real-life human problems. This is going to massively reduce cost of biological research, and it's real beneficial, especially in regenerative medicine. So very excited about it. It's a net win for us all. What can blockchain do for filmmaking? Really interesting question. There are a lot of problems in filmmaking. If you want to get a roller coaster into some of the things that happen on the financing side, look into the funding of The Wolf of Wall Street from Martin Scorsese. When you aggregate funds for these projects, there's royalty problems, there's organized crime that's involved, there's all kinds of crazy things that happen. So one side of it, the crowdfunding and the distribution of dividends and the understanding of financial agreements between people who are making a project like a film, that is something blockchain tech can be considerably useful for, especially long-term royalties that come there. And there's just so many people been screwed throughout that. The brokering of asset pipelines, like the purchasing of music and audio effects and visual effects and these types of things, establishing origin of intellectual property and royalty streams for that. That's another thing I think blockchain can make a lot of sense with as well. So, basically just the management of payment flows and royalties and IP, that's where filmmaking probably get a big benefit from blockchain technology. Wen Pal, I think that's Real Vision. I was on before, and at some point we'll ping him and play around with him. Did Epstein kill himself? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I've been asked this question a few times, and my opinion is that Epstein worked for an intelligence agency. He worked for them since the 1980s, and he had a very particular job, which was compromise. So he had a good gig. They put him up and gave him lots of money to live an exorbitant lifestyle and pretend to be a rich hedge fund guy. And then his job was to get rich, powerful people to go sleep with underage girls, record it, and then use the compromise to influence policy. There's just no reality where a rando can just have relationships with Prince Andrew and Bill Clinton and Donald Trump and Bill Gates and hundreds of other people in academia and policy and convince a lot of them to go and get compromised. And all of his rooms were wired up for sound. When it became clear that he was using young girls for this, he suffered no consequences for a long period of time, and he acted as if he was a made man. And then at the very end of his life, circumstances changed, and like all assets of intelligence agencies or inconvenience, he was cut loose, and he knew he was going to die. And then suddenly, the day of his death, weird stuff happened, and somehow a guy who should not have been killed just kills himself magically. He didn't kill himself at all. That's an example of a very real conspiracy. The other thing is the lack of media coverage tells you where power lies. If you're an investigative journalist, think of the prizes you can win and the accolades you can get, calling truth to power and showing that some of the richest, most powerful people in the world were pedophiles or abused young, innocent women. Yet, no one has any appetite to go and be an investigative journalist and dig into this story, despite the enormous draw it would have. Why? Because the people who own the mass media companies were also complicit with what Epstein did, and they buried that. And that in itself is a story. So he is the symptom, not the root cause, and he worked in a larger structure, and we don't know what that structure looks like, but this is not a new technique. At the Playboy Mansion, famous people would have sex in the grotto, and they were secretly recorded, and those secret recordings worked their hands into the CIA, and I think it was the 60s. And that's why Playboy got away with a lot of stuff. So this stuff does happen. Now, it's not Illuminati stuff. To this question right here, you see that Illuminati crap is real. This is what's called tradecraft. It's what spy agencies do. So when you are thinking about recruiting people to work for a spy agency, you have your agents who are loyal people, and they work for that country, and they're super vetted. And the agent's job for human capital, human intelligence, is to go and recruit local assets. And you have 4 dimensions you can recruit them in. It's called mice. So you can recruit them with money, so you bribe people. You can recruit them with ideology, like you're a communist state and they believe in capitalism and they hate communism, so they want to come in. You can attack them with ego. That's the E in mice. And that's where, some things happen, like maybe they got turned down for a promotion or something. Like there was cases in the Soviet Union where prominent scientists were trivialized and passed up, and they still knew a lot of government secrets, and so they got compromised that way. Or you can develop blackmail on them. So, for example, all the time, Israel and the United States, they monitor Iran very, very closely to try to figure out who's gay and who's not gay. And they have a whole beautiful network of all the homosexuals in that country. Why? Because it's a crime in that state. And if a particular government official is having a secret gay relationship, if that was to be publicly revealed, it would destroy his career, probably get him executed. So that's an example of compromise. And there's ways to either passively find it, where it falls in your lap and you use that information, or actively create compromise. For example, there was a Chinese spy recently who was sleeping with a U.S. congressman and absorbing information out of him. I forget the name. I think it was Selwell or something like that. One of these congressmen floating around that's been compromised. Well, Epstein is an example of a classic intelligence operation. You have a lot of wealthy, prominent people. Those prominent people are globalists, and they do business with everybody. If you compromise them and you have leverage against them, then they're probably going to work with you and give you information on a regular basis. Or if they're in a position of policy making, change policy to benefit the will of your country. Russia does this. China does this. A lot of people on the left, for example, believe that there's compromise on Donald Trump in Russia, that while he was there for the Miss Universe pageants and these other things, that there are sex tapes or other such things. Whether they exist or not, it's historically been done by the FSB in Russia. And Chinese do the same thing. We call them Natashas. Yeah, there we go. Eric Swalwell. That was the congressman who got compromised by the Chinese spy. Are you sure you want to be saying this stuff? Well, the cat's out of the bag. We live in a mass media market, and just list Chris Baker on the Rogan Experience, the head of diligence, who's a former CIA guy. These are open secrets. They're all known, and it's called tradecraft, and people understand them. What do you think of the World Economic Forum and their agenda? Everyone will own nothing. Do you believe we're in for Hunger Games society without the games? I think these globalists that go to the World Economic Forum, the vast majority of them are people that just love hearing themselves talk. They've never worked a real day in their life. A lot of these people inherited their money, their trust fund babies, or they're prominent, powerful politicians that have no moral core, and they just look for the flavor of the week. They were big gung-ho people with communism back in the day, and they're big gung-ho people with socialism, always been. And they keep telling us how great it all is, and the Great Reset is the latest incarnation of what these people talk about. But, at the end of the day, you got to implement the policy, and to implement it's real hard. Because the minute you start taking money or jobs or power away from people, things fall apart. But when you're rich and trust fundy and you have no accountability and you can fly anywhere on a private jet. I remember going to Davos this year. You couldn't fly into Davos because the airport was so filled with private jets. And everybody there was talking about how bad climate change is when they flew in a private jet to go to Davos. And they stay in a 10,000 square foot mansion. It's like the hypocrisy there is extraordinary to me. Absolutely extraordinary. Charles, Coinbase referred to you as a pothead? Do you guys have the link for that? I was not aware of that. Charles, why did Cardano opt for Ethiopia before Nigeria, which is Africa's most populous country and largest economy? We opted for Ethiopia because that's where the African Union is based, and there's a lot of programs that we felt were uniquely well-suited for what we were doing with Cardano, especially in agricultural technology. There's a nice ICT base in Nigeria, and frankly, you do Ethiopia, it's very easy to expand into Kenya and to Nigeria. And those four countries alone constitute 400 million people. It's a big chunk of the continent, about 40% of the population. My director for African operations is half Ethiopian and half English, and so it was kind of an easy fit. We understood what we were getting into. We saw the dynamics of the country. The other thing is Ethiopia is the only country in the world currently led by a cryptographer. The prime minister actually was a InfoSec expert who broke codes for the intelligence agencies in Ethiopia during the Eritrean War. So there's very few people around at the head of state level that you can have a computer science conversation with about your papers and actually gets what you're talking about when you say blocks cipher or stream cipher or these types of things. So it was a good combination of just luck and coincidence combined with the right environment and population. And also Ethiopia, a very pan-African view. So once you have a solid base of operations, it's incredibly easy to go to Kenya and Nigeria and Ghana and Rwanda and Uganda and so forth. And it's nice, 107 million people. That's not insignificant. Is John O'Connor still in Ethiopia? Yes, he is, despite the civil war. That's how committed our people are. They don't really care what's going on. Diseases, wars, internet being shut off, safety at risk. We tell them go home. They say no way in hell. They stay there. I had to pay some special forces people to build an extraction plan for my personnel there. So if something gets really bad, we have people lined up to go and get them out. But I mean, that's commitment, and they're there because they want to be there, and they're going to see it completely through to the end. Would you be able to be friends with high influence people such as the Clintons, knowing they're involved in this? I will never be friends with the Clintons. They're scumbags, absolute scumbags. And there's a lot of people in the upper echelons of society I have no desire to be friends with or know or interact with. I will never be in their clubs. They'll never invite me to their clubs, and I would reject if they did. I'll never join the Bilderberg group. I'll never join any of these things because you know what? That's the world it used to be. What we're trying to do is build a better world today where you're in charge, not a small group of elite people who presume they have the right to run society. So no way, no how. I won't pick up or return the phone calls. And call a spade a spade. Bad people are bad people. I don't care if they have wealth and money. Don't do business with them. Thoughts on the end of the Cardano effect? Now, that one broke my heart. I funded 76 episodes. I mentioned this in the earlier part of the episode, and the foundation did the rest. And they applied for funding. The community decided not to give it to them. And I think that's a loss for us all. I don't think they were asking for too much. I just think that they needed to do a few more rounds to explain what they were providing. Guys, we live in an era where Joe Rogan makes $100 million with his podcast, and Ben Shapiro makes tens of millions of dollars with his podcast. Podcasters can make an enormous sum of money. Look at PewDiePie. It's more of a question of, well, if you're going to ask for that much, you need to present a strategy that produces proportional value. So how do you get to 100,000 regular listeners, for example? How do you get real KPIs for Cardano? That's the kind of conversation we need to have. It's okay to ask for a large sum of money. It costs a large sum of money to build Tesla. It costs a large sum of money to do RNA treatments to cure cancer and these types of things. But your ask has to be proportional with value provided or potential value provided. And then it's up to the funder to decide if that risk assessment makes sense. In hindsight, probably would have been better to ask for funding a little later when the funds were a little larger. So by proportion, it was lower, like $1 million or $2 million for the fund. And I'm sure the foundation would have been happy to cover their costs long term. And if not, I would have been happy to cover their costs. But I'm not happy about it. I think the show added a lot of value to our ecosystem. I know Rick and Philippe personally. I've met them and spent a lot of time with them. I think they're both great people and they're quite ethical. And it's a critical piece of infrastructure for the community management component of our ecosystem. And they're going to be very difficult to replace. You're comparing a very niche podcast to Joe Rogan. Well, no, Joe Rogan was very niche at one point. He was Fear Factor guy. I mean, if you, while watching Fear Factor, a show that got canceled because he made women drink donkey semen, and somebody told you 10 years from now, this man is going to have the most culturally relevant podcast in the world with 30 million viewers, listeners every week, people think you're insane. Big things don't start big. Almost always they have little beginnings. And if you're going to ask for a lot of funding or more funding than people think, you need to be bold in the ask and say, this is what you're getting. So your point about being a niche and small podcast, they'd have to go and say, this is how we get it to be not so niche-y, not so small, and how it's going to grow. Like Ben Shapiro, for example, he's starting to broaden out from being just a conservative podcaster to basically being a media empire. He's making his own movies, R-rated movies. He hired Candace Owens. He's expanding his investigative journalist team. And he's like an anti-New York Times in that respect. And he has the freedom to do this because his subscription base has grown to a point where tens of millions of dollars of revenue come in every year. So he's one of the fastest growing media platforms around. And he's in many ways living up to what Glenn Beck tried to do with The Blaze. Well, did Ben start that way? No. Ben was just a guy. He was working with Breitbart and these other people, but he had the wherewithal to understand how growth works. And that's the point. Why are you wearing Clint Eastwood clothes? Because sometimes I'm good, and sometimes I'm bad, and sometimes I'm ugly. Ben Shapiro is making R-rated movies. I know. That's crazy. It's crazy. That's one. Have you seen on Netflix The Social Dilemma? I have not seen it yet. Everybody keeps telling me to watch it. Honestly, just not had the time. Freemasonry, what's your opinion? So on the great courses, there's a course on conspiracies and secret societies. It's 24 episodes long. I would highly, highly encourage you to watch all that. And the Freemasons are mentioned. Most of the founders of my country and signers of the Declaration of Independence and Constitution were Freemasons or related to Freemasons. There's a long legacy there. I am not a Freemason. Can't take the oath. What is your opinion on Scientology? Does it hold any truth? It's a dangerous cult. Yeah, it started by a megalomaniacal person with narcissistic personality disorder, and they sue anybody who attacks or criticizes them, and they engage in all the standard behavior of splitting up families and causing people to have fruity, crazy beliefs and getting financial control over people and generating compromise on people. So if they leave, their reputation can be destroyed. There are religions with wacky founders that kind of turn into reasonable institutions. Mormonism is an example of that. Setting the golden tablets and the craziness aside of the founder, the Mormon church has evolved to a point where it's become a productive mainstay of frontier society in Utah and other places. And Mormons are great members of society. There's no problem with them. And Mormon families can live happy lives. And the doctrine of Mormonism has gotten to a point through a series of evolutions to a point where it's not really problematic or harmful to people. Scientology will always be harmful because it's a death cult around a singular founder. And it was all about ingratiating the founder and enriching the founder. And that dynamic is still present. It has nothing to do with building people up. It has everything to do with tearing people down and making them part of a broader whole organism. And I have very low respect or tolerance for organizations that do that. So I don't think it holds any truth at all. And I think it's at best useless and at worst harmful. And the fact that they sue people who criticize them tells you everything you need to know. Crazy religions do that, not real ones. Thoughts on psilocybin, mushrooms, and spirituality? Oh, well, I think that psilocybin has been used for thousands of years by shamans and other religious figures and rituals. Michael Pollan covers this actually in his book, How to Change Your Mind, which is probably the single best introduction to psychedelics in modern literature. And it really gives you a sense of who all the key actors were and where that entire industry came from the creation of LSD to the experiments at Harvard in the 1960s and the hippie movement to the dark ages to the resurrection of psychedelics at Johns Hopkins. Say what we will about the spirituality component of it, tremendously beneficial for the treatment of depression, tremendously beneficial. And depression and post-traumatic stress disorder and other things. In many cases, they're showing that people actually can be taken off of antidepressants altogether after receiving just a few therapies with the guided therapies that they're doing with the Johns Hopkins experiments. It's one of the key reasons why, Oregon decriminalized psychedelics, just because there's so much evidence that's coming. And I think we're heading towards global decriminalization in the next 10 or 15 years, followed by a renaissance of research. Charles Hoskinson, who's your favorite philosopher? By far, Bertrand Russell. I also really like Albert Camus. I think combining both of them together is difficult, like an unstable element, but it has wonderful results if you can pull it off. Charles, have you played Baldur's Gate 3? I took a look at it. As a game developer, I have the ability to look at these things. Larian Studios makes it. They're the guys who did the Divinity series, and they do just phenomenal job with all the things they do. It's an early release. It's still a little rough, and there's a lot of work the game needs. And unfortunately, the game system they have and the play system they have doesn't fit so well with 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. And I think it's quite unfortunate they weren't allowed just to use the Divinity game mechanics, because they're much, much better for how they approach making games. But all things considered, it's if they keep working on it, I think it's going to be a very solid asset. I think it's unfortunate that it exists within the Baldur's Gate milieu. The reality is that that's a closed story. And if you're going to approach it, they should redo the games, remaster the games as a trilogy. One of the biggest mistakes BioWare and these other guys made with Baldur's Gate was not having Throne of Bhaal be a standalone new game as opposed to an expansion pack of Baldur's Gate 2. That is really amenable to a trilogy, and they just didn't do that. So I think it should have been remade as an entire group with a single studio, Peter Jackson style. And it's real sad that they didn't do that. Charles, you really have to learn to open up more. It's hard to see where you stand on an issue. That's a good thing. I try to stick with just to the facts and things that I've analyzed to a point where I feel comfortable stating it. I don't really go and say, oh, well, it's what I believe. And you must believe this too. I just try to say, okay, well, here's where it's at. All things in life are nuanced and complicated, and there's more to the story than any one person's opinion. And the reality is that wisdom and truth take time to arrive to. And that's the miracle of age. Age takes from you youth. You get weaker, start getting more pains. I have terrible gout, and God, it creates problems at times. I didn't have that when I was 20. On the other hand, I have a lot more wisdom than when I was 20. So you lose something, but you gain something. And I think more people need to acknowledge that. Would you ever do a game with the Godot engine? I've actually received a lot of people's recommendations to do something with Godot. It's a cool game engine. I actually had a chance to take a look at it. open source engine, a lot of adherence, and it's really nice for indie and small games. Babylon JS is also a pretty good game engine as well, and I like the physics engine that they have there. And also, it makes sense to build a game in JavaScript as an open source project. I don't think Godot is a viable competitor, though, to Unity or Unreal. I mean, just how you handle asset pipelines and how you handle the curation and project management of a large-scale AAA title within those ecosystems is much more evolved and refined than what you see with Godot. And also with performance and cross-platform capabilities, there's just nothing to match those two. And CryEngine as well. I'd say the easiest of all three of those is Unity. But Godot is definitely useful. And if I was an independent open source game developer, making my own games like Basilisk games or something with the Escalon series, I'd probably use Godot or something like that. It's a good engine. Charles made video games before. I still do. I own a video game company. I just bought Legends of Valor, and we're doing a remake. Watch the earlier parts of the episode. Yeah. Yeah, there you go, Tony. You know how to ask these questions, don't you? It is unfortunate we live in a time where people feel fear in discussing certain topics that ought to be discussed. Are those Hellraiser cubes on the desk behind you? Yes, they're called Lament configurations, and they are. Have you seen Lord of the Rings in 4K yet? Not yet. I am absolutely planning on getting them and absolutely planning on watching them. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch Lord of the Rings in 4K because they redid The Hobbit as well, and they somehow managed to reconcile the remake and remastery with the 48 frames per second shot that they did. Jackson is a master, and if given enough time and money, he can do anything. You should have seen They Shall Not Grow Old, his remastery of the World War I footage, for an example of what he can do. Will you cooperate with the Holochain team? Try to read the green paper and code. I tried to engage with them. The community was not very friendly or amicable, and I just gave up. Pro tip, if you want somebody to engage with you, especially a larger cryptocurrency, be helpful and open. I'm sure there's interesting things there, but there's just not for me because I don't have the time, and there's 3,000 projects to look at. And I've received so much great support from Ergo and the Waves community and the Zen Protocol community and dozens of others. I'd rather spend my time with novel ideas there than ones that aren't super welcoming. Do you think the new Dune movie will be any good? Yes, I think Denis Villeneuve is a modern-day Stanley Kubrick, and I think Dune is going to be phenomenal. It's going to be a beautiful movie. Will you integrate Legends of Valor with Cardano? If so, how? Likely we'll do non-fungible assets. I might actually do an in-game currency for games in the game because there was gambling inside the game. There's dozens of things we could do, and I will brainstorm with you guys, the community, when the time comes for that. And we will definitely pull something in. Nice poncho. Well, thank you. Still in communication with Sergei Nazarov. Yeah, we talked to him. Do you like boxing? I absolutely do. What about VR, Charles? Well, this is another example of where Unity has so much of a lead on people. When you look at Godot or Babylon versus Unity, your support for emerging platforms like Oculus and the HTC Vive and these types of things is much, much, much better than it is in these open source engines. And, it's just sad, but that's the way the economics works. If you want to do cross-platform deployment on PlayStation, Xbox, PC, Mac, Linux, and VR, and in the browser, you're going to have to use technology like that. What is Wadler up to these days? Writing papers and working on Plutus. Actually, we're at a very pivotal moment, and Plutus is just about to go mainstream. So he's going to be a busy guy. He's doing good work. We're also getting him a few postdocs and graduate students related to the work he's doing. Got to create a legacy and make sure there's some academics trained to carry that on. Thoughts on the rise of the China-U.S. conflict? Looks like we're headed for a Thucydides trap. How was Caitlin Long? I think she just did some sort of marksman thing. She hit something like 1,000 yards away or something like that. She's a badass. That woman's one of the most amazing I've ever met, and I really love the work that she does. Have you ever seen Silicon Valley from HBO? Telling me my Lamborghini needs doors that open like this instead of this? I need doors that open like that? Nope, never seen it. Is it possible to create an AI that can distinguish truth and lies? We call that a veracity metric or a veracity agent. And yes, it's done all the time in the intelligence community. Dang, wow, you're still live? I went to Lowe's to get a hot water heater, came back, installed it, and was going to watch the recording. Well, what type of hot water heater did you get? Did you get a gas heater? Did you get an electric water heater? Is it tankless, a tank? You got to give me more information, man. Have you heard about Tesnic's open source hydrogen engines? I have not, and I will look it up. Writing it down right now. Tesnic. I always find out the most interesting things from my community. You have a tankless propane. There you go. Propane and propane accessories. Does vitamin D help your gout? My problem is that I was unmedicated. I'm supposed to take allopurinol, and I finally threw in the towel when the gout got to my ankle and said, shit, all right, I'll take it. But right when you're getting on allopurinol, it usually causes another flare-up, and I'm dealing with that right now. It's not pronounced HTC Vive. It is Vive with the sound of I. I prefer it my way. Gout issue, quit eating red meat. No, I will never stop eating red meat, and that's not the primary source of purines, you bastard. I eat too much shellfish. That's what's doing me in. That's where the purines are coming from. I will die on the hill of red meat. What do you think about Joe Biden? Does he understand crypto? I don't think he understands much of anything. He's a very old man. I think the people around him understand a lot more. Janet Yellen is going to be the Treasury Secretary. That's an interesting one. Charles, why do other POS chains like Polkadot need slashing while Cardano doesn't need that for staking? Because we carefully designed the economic model and it's completely unnecessary to implement that. And you're just hurting your community by doing so. We don't need punitive measures to make the system work well. And the fact that we're working without them is a demonstration of that. Yeah, how the hell did they end up with Person of the Year? Because they did the thing that the media cared more about than anything else. They defeated Trump. That alone was all they needed to do. Didn't have to campaign. He did what McKinley did when he was running against William Jennings Bryan back in 1900 or whatever. He just basically was the not Trump option, and because he won, you're Man of the Year. He could murder children in the street. At this point, he'd be a better man because they hate him so much. They hate Trump so much. Mm-hmm. Charles, thoughts on Tulsi Gabbard introducing a bill to ban trans women from competing in female sports? This is an example of a conversation that needs to be had. And our society is living in a really bizarre world where certain topics you just are not allowed to have a conversation and work through. To pretend like it's settled and there's no controversy is an insane statement. And unfortunately, it's becoming the standard as opposed to the exception of the rule. And Douglas Murray actually wrote a lovely book called Madness of the Crowd, specifically on this topic, among other topics in the new social justice stuff and racial justice and economic justice and these other things that exist. And it's just bizarre. There's so many inconsistencies floating about, and things change so quickly. Like you can be in the middle of a Supreme Court confirmation hearing, and then you hear sexual preference is now not PC, and Webster's dictionary has to suddenly change overnight the dictionary just because it's, oh God, I guess we were out of date. Everything's a little crazy right now. And bills like that, they are uncomfortable, but what they do is they force the conversation. And we should not be afraid to have that conversation. And anybody who tells you otherwise, they're not people you should listen to. I mentioned this, Thomas. Have you heard about the breakthrough in human longevity research in regards to high oxygen environments, lengthening telomeres upwards of 20% after successions? It was 20 to 34%, depending upon the particular person. And they actually measured the telomere length pre, during, and post by taking people's blood. Looks really promising. The science was done very well. And I think it was a well-constructed study out of Israel. I'm going to buy a hyperbaric chamber and try it out myself and actually go ahead and take a look at my biological age and see if there are improvements as a consequence of it. Parlo l'italiano? Non lo so, non lo so. Will Mike Tyson fight again? Yes, he is negotiating with Evander Holyfield, and we're going to have a Tyson Holyfield exhibition. And Tyson is going to crush him. I think he's got a perfect thing going on here. Or it says Tyson should retire gratefully. Tyson has been, in and out 14 years, and what he's done is he's found a way to basically have reasonable, entertaining fights that are low stakes, and they actually accomplish what boxing has become. Boxing is not a sport. Yes, it's an Olympic sport, and people do it, millions of people, for exercise, and there's competitiveness and so forth. Boxing at the highest levels is entertainment. It's kayfabe. It's not quite world wrestling where it's staged, but basically you create a narrative. People take sides in that narrative, and they really get excited about it. There's cultural pride, like when Pacquiao was fighting Marquez. And they were like, oh, yeah, that's our guy. They shut down all the Philippines for it. And people just fight for that person. So the athleticism, the actual technicalities of it, none of that really matters too much. It's all about the story. It's all about the narrative. It's all about the entertainment value for it. So Tyson has moved from I'm a contender in the sport of boxing to I'm an entertainer in the sport of boxing. And 1.5 million people signed up for pay-per-view, myself included, at $50 a pop. That's $75 million to watch that exhibition. And we got to see Snoop Dogg as a announcer, and God, he did a great job, and I really enjoyed it. It was a great fight, and it was well done. And he lost 100 pounds training for the fight. He got in good shape. These 2-minute rounds, not bad. Not bad at all. I think 50-year-old boxers can comfortably do that and not get hurt. Charles, you should get a float tank. I own one and love it. I am getting one. Are you a pro wrestling fan? No, but I understand it. And actually, if you go to Wisecrack on YouTube and you guys Google kayfabe, and actually watch that video on pro wrestling, it really puts it all into context. You actually understand why it exists and why it's popular and what it's all about. And I do love Macho Man Randy Savage. It's great. Mike Tyson actually makes $1 million a month from his marijuana plantation. It's pretty crazy. I have an idea for an NFT game, but I'm not a gamer. Where can I learn game design and theory? Coursera has a specialization from Michigan State University. It's the top 2 game program in the world. Highly recommend that one. And there's also a course on gamification from Ken Weisbach out of Penn State. Well, you're asking about a different type of meditation. Let me show you something I just got. I am a huge fan of brain-computer interfaces and devices. I have a Muse at home. I have a NeoRhythm. Just got a Mendy. I was part of the crowdfunding campaign. And I just bought a BrainTap. How about that? So we're going to try it out, see if it works. So every time they come out with a newfangled device, I always buy it, test it. A lot of them are duds. Some are actually quite helpful. But one of these days, we'll have the perfect device to get you into a flow state and manage meditation. Well, there you go. One of these days, they'll ship it to us. They were supposed to ship mine in November, but I guess we'll have that in December. This guy spends all that ADA to buy shit. No, I have Bitcoin. Lots and lots of Bitcoin. It turns out that when you join something way early in the day and it goes to the moon, you have a little bit of disposable income. Thoughts on the Wim Hof method? I was going to train with Wim Hof earlier this year in March. Unfortunately, COVID ended that, so rolled it over to next year. But I will go train with him in Amsterdam or wherever he does his seminar, and we'll have a lot of fun. And he has a cell phone app now you can use for the Wim Hof method. Is it worth doing a master's in program with no background knowledge? My recommendation is Harvard University has something called Harvard Extension, and they actually have a programming, a software engineering certificate that they do. And I think that if you really want to become a software engineer, you have a bachelor's degree and you're inclined, take the free course that they offer, CS50 on edX. You can get through that, go do the software engineering certificate that they have. It's a graduate certificate. And you'll get where you need to go with that at a significantly lower cost. And if you really, 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 really like it, you can continue on and complete a master's degree and at Harvard Extension. It's open enrollment, and you'll have a Harvard degree. But they're really persnickety. You won't get an AM, you'll get an ALM from Harvard, but it's in Latin, so no one can read it anyway. Are you familiar with HemiSync in the Monroe Institute? I am not. So that's another thing I'm going to write down. Here we go. This is why we crowdsource knowledge, you see. This is another cool device. This is something from Apollo Neuroscience. I use it every day. You put it on your wrist. It vibrates for 30 minutes, and it actually helps with heart rate variability. It calms you down and puts you in a more relaxed state. It actually works. Okay. Any connection or plans in South America? Large chunks of Cardano is made in South America. In fact, the whole Rosetta library for Coinbase was written in Buenos Aires by a firm called ATEX. We have a great Latin and South American team. We have people in Mexico, people in Costa Rica. We have people in South America and Peru, and in Chile and Argentina. So it's a great team. And there are actually some people in Brazil, great Brazilian community. There's a lot of wonderful people there. So yes, and I love South America. All right, let's do one more and then we'll cut it. Better make it good, guys. Trying to really find a good one. All your base are now belong to us. That's an old one. It's a very old meme. Where can I start to develop my mobile application ideas? I'm in college. I think probably the best thing you can do is buy a book from Big Nerd Ranch, and they have a nice training program that exists there. But there's also some free courses on Udemy and Coursera and other places that you can have. But they have a great pedagogy for Android applications. And just follow it end to end, do the tutorial and build something. If you actually have programming inclination, you can get through that entire curriculum. Then you'll definitely be in a great position to build something significant and meaningful. And it covers the whole thing, from version control systems to continuous integration to setting up proper acceptance criteria and QA, doing test-driven development, the life cycle of the software, how to plan out agile sprints for feature development, and so forth. There's a lot you have to learn to do a project like that. Good night, everyone.